Hello, this is Mike at GameFromScratch. Welcome back to our ongoing closer look at game engine series. This is a combination of a review and getting started tutorial to decide if a game engine is the right fit for you. And today what we are looking at is GDevelop. Now GDevelop is along the lines of, say, Stencil or Construct 3. It's one of those game engines that have a visual programming interface. So you don't really write code per se, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead you use a visual interface for doing so. Now the cool thing about GDevelop is it is completely free. It is open source, MIT licensed for the base engine and framework, and then the editor itself is available in under the GPL3 license. Basically, MIT license allows you to do just about whatever you want, while as the GPL3 is much more restrictive. More or less, if you make any changes, you have to release those changes. So if you change the editor or extend the editor, you have to release or make those changes available. That's one of the very nicest things about GDevelop. This is an open source project. All of the code is available on GitHub. It's a C++ project, so if you know C++, this is an engine for you. It's also a very extensible engine, as we're going to see in a short period of time. Pretty much all of the functionality is actually implemented as extensions that are available, again, in C++. So if you are a C++ coder, you can use the underlying API to extend the functionality. This engine itself is built over top of the SFML library, so if you're familiar with SFML, you should be familiar with the coding structure for GDevelop. Unfortunately, when it comes to writing extensions, the documentation on doing so is rather limited. So back to the engine itself. Now, of course, you don't have to drop into any of that C++ stuff unless you actually want to do extensions. This is designed to be a very beginner-friendly engine, as we will see in a moment. Now, you can go ahead and download it. Just basically go to compilegames.net and click the download link. Now it is available for Windows, various Linux distributions including Ubuntu, Mac OS X, and iOS, Android sort of. Now iOS, Android, and HTML5 are supported via something called GDevapp.com, which is basically a web-based version of GDevelop. So basically GDevelop in the browser. It's also available as a download for GDevelop app is on the App Store. Now, I'm not going to be talking about GDevelop app, but if you're on mobile and you want to develop games, do be sure to check that out, or if you want to develop games specifically in your browser, it is a port that's available. So once you've downloaded this, it's a pretty straightforward install, and then it'll bring you into the editor. Now here you see GDevelop running with one of the default projects. We're going to start a project from scratch, but I wanted to show you one actually up and going. Now it is capable of, out of the box, you're basically building for web targets. However, you could switch between the web version and the native version of projects. Now, some functionality is only available on native, unfortunately. For example, tiled map support is only supported under native. Actually, I'm not sure where I was going with my line of thought there. Your programming interface is pretty straightforward. Here in the middle, you see this is your scene. These are the various objects and entities that make up your scene. You can see them over here from the object editor. So, for example, slime. There's our slime right here. Now, we'll go ahead and open up slime, and you'll see it brings us into the Sprite editor. We'll do this from scratch in a second, but it gives you an idea of what's going on here. Over here, you have the image bank. Now, one thing I do need to put as a negative to GDevelop is it runs horrifically in a high definition monitor that's doing non-native sampling. So example, I have an HDPI display for my laptop, but in order to get this guy running, I need to actually turn high DPI scaling off and lower my resolution down. So it does a very bad job there. So if you're on a Retina display or a high DPI Windows display, do be aware there are some issues there. So anyways, you can see here in this particular editor, here's all the images available to our project. Here is a defined animation, and here are the two different animation options. Again, we will look at this from scratch. But over here is where the basic building blocks of your game are composed over here. Also, you can group things together so you can handle them in code as a common entity. Over here you have your project manager. Basically this contains your scenes, potentially your images if you control them that way, and you can even link out to external event sheets. It allows you to modularize your event sheets. Now let's get back to event sheets for a sec. This is actually how the programming, the primary primary programming method of GDevelop is through these event scripts. And you can see here, it's basically a spreadsheet. Unfortunately, the tools for zooming in and out on this are pretty non-existent. So again, on certain displays, it's very annoying to try and actually read this. And if you're on a big monitor running at 1080p, there's no issues at all. But in this day and age, this should be zoomable. Kind of unfortunate that it isn't. But you can see here, this is basically how your programming works. So I'm going to look at this again from a very simple example. And why don't we do that right now? I'm going to come back here. We're going to go ahead and create a new project. So create new. You see we've got a couple of different templates available, such as an Angry Birds clone, a platforming, a web shooter, and a soldier game. And then again, you can see the two different platforms that are supported: native, which is Windows or Linux-based games, and then over here we've got HTML5-based games. I'm going to go ahead and start with HTML5. You can switch back and forth which ones you just want to support later on. So let's go ahead and create an empty project, like so. All right, so here we are in our empty project. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to start off by creating a sprite for our game. So go ahead, add an object, and you see here we've got the different object types, and all of these are grayed out. They're not enabled. These are all extensions actually, so they're not enabled until you actually enable them. But in this case, we're actually going to go ahead and work with Sprite. If you wanted to enable one though, you would just simply double click it. It would prompt you, do you wish to enable this object? And you would say yes or no. Now we got some visual issues going on down here, so let's go ahead. We'll double click on that guy. Here, actually, I'm going to go ahead and rename that. Oops. Right click. Rename, and we'll call this my Sprite. And then we'll do that double click, brings up that editor, and we're going to bring in some, there's built-in images you can use from right here, but we'll go ahead and we'll do load images from file on my desktop. And I'm going to bring in these 3 frames of animation like so. It's just a burning barrel. So they are now loaded. I'm going to grab each one of these frames and bring it down here into the images palette. So you've got frame 1, frame 2, frame 3 of our animation. And you'll see there's always at least one animation. Even if your animation has just one frame, there will automatically be one animation here. And we're going to go ahead, we'll change the name of this to burning barrel. And let's change the properties of this animation. So it's going to be 0.33 milliseconds. So in 1 second, it will cycle through all of its different frames of animation. Go ahead and play it. And you can see there's the result of what it looks like. Oh, and I want to go ahead and turn that to loop too. So looping is on. So there you can see, there is our object. That's how you go ahead and create a sprite in this world. Very simple. So now we're going to go ahead and grab that sprite. And this is one of those areas where I've had some glitchiness. Is freshly created objects. I can sometimes drag them over. I sometimes can't. All right, so it worked first time there. So now it is in our world, like so. And we can go ahead and preview our game right now. So go ahead and click the preview button. It'll automatically load it in your browser of choice. And there you can see our animated sprite going on. Perfect. So now head on back over here. We can, as you can see, there's transform widgets. We can resize our sprite like so. Scale it one particular direction. We can rotate it, etc. So, oh, I cannot undo that action. So we come back here and go into other properties. We can see some of the settings we can do for this guy. We're going to come back to this a little bit. We can add a behavior to this, which is sort of like canned pre-programming support. We can also create variables that are attached to this specific object. And we can also go ahead and edit the object, which brings us back to this editor that we saw earlier. I don't know why I left focus there, but I did. Okay, so that is how you create a simple object in the scene. Now let's go ahead and look at the programming behind it. So with our object, here, we got our scene selected, so we can see our scene. Let's close out this platformer so it doesn't get confusing. Scene over here, new scene. So with the scene selected, go over here to the Events tab, and we can add an event. So go over here to the Events, add an event, and then you've basically got condition and then action. And we'll look at just action for one. We'll do a very simple action here. We're going to just move the object around every frame. So this is basically, you can think of every pass through the game loop, this action will be fired. So if there's a condition, it will check if that condition is true or not. If there's no condition, the action will just fire. So we'll go ahead and do an action, say position, position.x, the object we wanted to apply it to, so our sprite, we're just going to add 1 to it. And then go ahead and press play on that. So, and now you'll see every frame we are moving over by 1 pixel. Very simple. And then we could do like a check to say basically if we went over the bounds of the screen, go on back to the other side. So the programming interface is quite simple. By using this interface, it allows you to basically see what's available by trial and error. It's a nice, easy way to learn. Now, if we want to come on back here, let's get rid of that logic and let's change this guy up a bit. So instead what we're going to do is do it so that we're going to position the object. So once again, we're going to do the same thing. So position of an object. We're going to pick our object. That's our sprite. But here instead, we're going to be assigning it. In the X position, pick this formula button over here and pick mouse cursor X, base layer on the camera, say yes, and then click OK. And then we want to scroll down. Again, a little bit of UI glitchy. I have to resize the window. There's no automatic scroll bars, unfortunately. So there are some usability issues for sure in this guy. Again, click the formula, mouse cursor .y, choose OK, and add that in. And you can see this basically generated code for us. I would scroll in on that. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, I don't have that functionality. But now you'll see basically as we move our mouse around, this object will follow that particular cursor. So go ahead and preview that. Load our game up and you'll see, ta-da! So very simple to add this programmed ability to game objects. And again, as we could come in, we could also do it conditional. So basically your conditions are various different things down here. So I could do it, so let's say, let's delete this line completely. Delete, over to events, we'll add a new event. And our condition is, say, if I press the keyboard, key pressed, pick the key, and I'll do spacebar. So if I press the spacebar, now this condition is going to fire. So in the condition of pressing the spacebar, we're going to do this action. Now for the action, we'll go ahead and, so we could do things such as, play a sound, play some music, quit the game. Actually, that's exactly what we'll do. Okay, so quit the game. So when we press the spacebar, let's quit our game. I don't know what that's actually going to do in a browser. Probably nothing. We'll find out. It just stops it from playing. Whereas on the desktop, I imagine it would exit it down. So it kind of depends on what you did your build for. But that is your programming model. And at the same time, you can add sub-events that are built off of this particular hierarchy of, so now this needs to be true for the rest of these to work down. So you can make your more complex events down. Another thing you can do is actually do external events. So you could create an external event, basically you pretend we're as if we're this scene, and now I can come in here and I can add whatever conditions to this. So basically this is like a module. This is a bit of code that will be added as, whenever I put it in there. So there I've created this external event, this external chunk of code. So now I'll go back to my main scene. Here, what we can do here is go add. Let's see, we got these other options. So we've got things like we can do an add a comment. So here, let's fire off the external event. All right, so that's just there for display type thing. But what we can now do is go add, and then within it, link. And this will fire off my external event, like so. Drag that down so that it's in there. And there you can see this will now fire off all of the code that is in this particular set of events. And the program interface is the exact same as we were using before. It just, again, allows you to make things modular, break your code up into usable pieces and chunks. And that's kind of how it's supported. All right, so without further ado, first off, let's undo everything I just did, just to make sure. So I want to delete. Delete. All right, we're back to having no code. Now I'm going to go back and show you a bit about behaviors. This is actually kind of cool. So here we are back to my sprite. I'm going to go back to the other properties of my sprite. You come on down here, you can see behaviors. So I'm going to go ahead and add a behavior. And you see here, these again are extensions that basically have been added or built into GDevelop. And you could if you wished, add your own. So what we're going to do here is add a top-down movement, but you can see there's other options down here like physics integration, pathfinding, draggable objects. So we could actually implement what we just did with following around the mouse via a behavior. What we're going to do now is 4 or 8 directional movement. So I say, yes, I want to go ahead and add that behavior in. And then now that it's in here, you'll see top-down movement was added. I now have new options I can configure right here. And I'm just going to quickly turn away the ability to rotate and the ability to go on diagonal. So I now just added 4 directional movement to my object. Again, I weirdly lost focus. All right, so now that that is added, let's go on back to scene here and click preview. And then if I use my arrow keys, we can now move around the scene. So very easy to add default behavior to objects in the form of behaviors. Now let's head on back over to the editor here. What else to show? There are other settings you can see here. One thing that's useful, again, is in your events. It is possible you want to add some kind of variables. You can add a variable to an object. Oops, wrong thing. Why do you lose focus? So where did they go? Variables. All right, so here, so we can add instance variables to our particular object, like so. Stop losing focus, stupid. We can do it at the project level. So we can say modify global variables. So I can add a new variable such as, say, meaning of life, and give it a value. And now we can interact with that in our event code throughout the scene. Another thing that's kind of important is come into your scene, go into modify initial values. You can actually set up variables that are tied to the scene itself. We also can come in here and go to edit the properties, and you'll see a couple of the advanced settings here, mostly around the rendering settings. We've got the same thing for editing the properties of the game. Here you can, oops, I did not mean to dock that. Come on, undock. Undock. Okay, there we go. Sorry. As you see, that you can drag and drop dock around by going over particular hover regions. It's also an unfortunately easy way to. All right, stop docking. Here you can see basically we can control the compilation settings, we can control the width and height of our particular project when it's generated. And as I mentioned earlier, actually, there are multiple platforms. I said we could switch over to native if we wished. You'll notice right now we are still an HTML5 project. So I come over here, I go to File, you'll see I can only export to the web. So if I switch that up now, go back to the extension setting here, I can use this platform on. So now we're compiling for native as well. And we'll close that down. And now you'll see if I go to File, Export, I can also compile to a native executable. We'll go ahead and do this really quickly. You'll see it comes here, clicks compile, and it's using its built-in C++ suite. Hit yes, and you'll see here it created us an exe and all the assorted DLLs that are required to go with it. So this could now be deployed. Your game is ready to go. So this is a native compiled executable, and there's no need for you to have installed your own tool chain at all. It's all built in, thankfully, for you. So that is native compilation right there. Now, I did mention earlier on that there is some module support. Go back into the extensions. Let's shut that down. You'll see some of these things are native only. So tile map objects, for example, are only available for the native platform, which is unfortunate. I'd like to see you know, more of these supported across both platforms. But you can see there are a number of extensions available out of the box. Go here to the unofficial extension. Oh, no, we can't. Okay, that is broken. Won't do that. Head on back over. But here are your extensions out of the box. You can get more external extensions that are shared elsewhere. It does seem that the current link for that shared page, unfortunately, is unavailable. And, you know, in many ways, that's really all we're going to talk about today. We come back here to the object editor for a bit for our scene. A couple other things to show you, I suppose. Scene here, for example, we can do instances to see all of the, you know, go back to scene view here. So you see we've got one instance of my sprite. So if I had more than one, like so, you see here. If I now go back to the scene section, instances, you will see I now have 2 instances available here. Another thing we've got here is the layers editor, like so. And this enables you to set up and define a camera. You make multiple cameras if you should wish. And you can also add some built-in effects that work with that layer. Let's get out of there. Why did you lose focus again? Okay. Another thing you'll notice is there's the option of a grid. You can change how the grid works. You can snap things back to 0, 0 in the origin. And there is an undo and redo here for changes you've made. It's kind of the extent of it, actually. In terms of help for GDevelop, wow, guys, fix your in-game links. All right, so ultimately help brings you here. I believe if you click it this way, yeah, the link works. So there are definitely some things they need to work on here, and a lot of it is actually just polished stuff. The UI, DPI scaling needs to definitely improve. They need to add the ability to zoom. They need to have the ability to jump into your code and scale it up, make it look a little bit better. Some of the font issues are definitely there, and then of course you're seeing little things like links that go off to broken pages. But anyways, in terms of the documentation, we saw early on there was 5 or 6 templates to get you started. They're reasonably good places to start. You'll find some of the commenting is actually in French. When it comes down to the communities, there are 2 forums. There's an English and a French forum. They're both fairly active. And then here you see we've got a manual that basically goes over the basics of the various different pieces here. So for example, our Sprite object that we were dealing with earlier, and it'll walk you through the editor, creating animations, etc. So there is a solid bit of documentation, especially for an open source project. On top of that, we also have a getting started page, walks you through the different particular pieces, and then perhaps most where you'll spend your most time is there are quite a few tutorials that are at a varying different level, skill level. Yeah, I think that's kind of about it. It's actually pretty short for a closer look at video. Pretty straightforward engine in what it does and how it does it. Again, one of the big flaws they have here is the native stuff, the core library itself. So if we go back here, you'll see you've got this core that it's built around in the CPP layer and the JavaScript layer, the underlying layer. I haven't found a reference for it. Now it might exist and they may not have found it, but unfortunately the underlying code API that you would end up using if you were going to create your own extensions is relatively undocumented. So most of what you would end up doing is coming in here to the extensions and come on. Picking one of the ones that's built in. So for example, we used top-down movement behavior. If you wanted to see how that was implemented, you just come on in here and you can see the code that they used. Now, I don't know why this is being so slow for me all of a sudden, but regardless. So here you go. This, how you go about writing these extensions, if you do need to in fact write extensions, is relatively undocumented. So you do have to basically do trial and error. Now, I could be wrong there, and it could be the documentation exists and I just couldn't locate it. But if that's the case, that's a different problem they've got going on. So really, that's about it. That's going to wind it up for the day. That is GDevelop that we've looked at today. Again, it's open source, MIT licensed, very visual in structured programming. If that's your thing, definitely do check this out. If it's not, I understand it's definitely not for everybody. You know, if you get past the few layers of polish that are missing, it is a pretty capable engine. So, you know, if you are looking for a 2D game engine that has more of an accessible programming interface, and what you saw today looks, you know, like something you'd be interested in, I do recommend you check it out. You got nothing to lose. It is completely free, of course. So that was GDevelop, available at Compile Games, no E, so COMPIL, games.net. I'll link that down below. And that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please, of course, do click like, and we cover all kinds of game development related topics here on Game from Scratch. And if that sounds interesting to you, please do click that subscribe button. All right, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed that. See you all later. Goodbye.